Hello, everyone. Hello there and welcome. My name is Michael and I'm the events host here at Annie Bloom's Books. Well, I'm at a remote location, but I am the events host for Annie Bloom's Books in Portland, Oregon. Thanks for making time to join us this evening. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're in Multnomah Village, which is a little neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. We've been around for a little over 40 years and we are plugging along despite everything that's going on in the world right now. Our store is currently closed to browsing, but staff are at the store every day from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. to answer phones and reply to emails. That's Pacific time, of course. They love to hear from people who are looking for book recommendations. So get in touch with them one way or another. And our website is always open at www.annieblooms.com. You can shop there day or night. And you can particularly shop for Charles Souby's book. I will put a link here in the chat where you can go and pick that up. There you go. So we've got some other great events coming up in the next couple of weeks here. Scott Nadelson, who's a Portlander, he's doing a short story, another short story collection called One of Us. That's on the 20th at 7 p.m. Portland authors David Byspiel and Vanessa Veselka are reading together on the 27th. And another Portland author, Lois Riskai Molina, with Portland poet Paul Han Peterson. It's a lot of alliteration, on the 30th. Tonight, we are delighted to be hosting Charles Souby. We have books on hand at the store, follow that link. And if you want a signed copy, leave a comment to that effect in your order, and we'll pass that along to Charles, and you can sign a book plate and send that to us. Even if you have your own copies of his book already, they make for great holiday gifts. So pick up an extra copy. We do free gift wrapping at the store. Charles is going to read, and then there'll be a Q&A session following that. Well, following the reading, I'm going to ask him a few questions, and then we'll let you guys ask some questions. Charles Souby, in case you don't know, was born on the Chicago North Shore, where he lived until 1975, when he moved to San Francisco to attend the University of San Francisco, where he studied broadcast communications and music, and then San Francisco State, where he received a BA in English literature. Between 1982 and 1996, Charles found himself living close to the curb. Then he turned his life around and began studying creative writing with James Tipton at College of Marin, and later studied improvisational theater at Bats Improv in San Francisco. This intensive study culminated in the creation and publication of his first novel, WINIFRED, and his ensuing novel, A Shot of Malaria, as well as a collection of short stories that are featured tonight, and a pending third novel, haha. Charles Souby currently resides in Kapaa, Hawaii, where he continues to write fiction and poetry. So the book that he is reading from tonight, although maybe not exclusively, is A View from the Borderline. It's a collection of short fiction that runs the gamut from dark and gritty satire to sweet and serious love. This volume includes a man plotting to poison a park full of pigeons, hey, more P alliteration, to frame a bothersome old lady, a high school delinquent who falls for a dispossessed girl about to be shipped off to an asylum, and a rave promoter's diabolical plot to abduct mindless teenagers for unthinkable purposes. Stories in this collection have appeared in the Saturday Evening Post, E-Fiction Magazine, and The Opening Line. Charles Souby, everyone.
All right. Wow, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, thank you. I'm really, yeah, I'm so glad to see you all. And I'm very grateful that you came out here to hear me read. I was going to actually read, you know, particularly for those of you on the mainland, I was going to read, I have lanai with, you know, this beautiful, you know, tree. Well, I mean, if you live in Marin County, you see trees anyway, so it's not a big deal. But the problem out there is that there's roosters, and they're really loud, and they can be really distracting. So I decided to just hide out in my office here. I rearranged my bookshelves so that it looked more literary behind me. So I hope that helps for y'all. Okay, so I'm going to read an excerpt from the short story, The Gurgling Coo, from a view from the Borderline. And then we'll do the Q&A. And then I actually, it was suggested that maybe I read, it's kind of short, but the first chapter of my current novel that I'm It's awaiting publication, a long time gone as well. We'll see if there's time and interest for that. So, okay, anyway, a gurgling coo. There were too many to count. Now let me get my glasses on here. There were too many to count. It was a disgrace. Mrs. Goldberg baited them into Baker's Park, where all they did was stumble around, squawking, farting, and ruining Davenport's peaceful weekday mornings. Davenport had retired early in life because he was a smart investor. He had planned his life decades ahead, living frugally through the years. When he left home for college, his dad taught him, a smart man thinks about the golden hay when the grass first starts turning green. His dad was chock full of wisdom like that, and Davenport had waited half his life to sit on a park bench and dispense those chestnuts to the local high school students. Just like back in his own day, high school kids wandered into Baker's Park during their class breaks to study and hang out and sometimes even smoke cigarettes. Davenport himself had to quit smoking some 15 years earlier due to a doctor's ultimatum, but his dad had told him, a few sins now and then are a strong man's virtue. Davenport lived alone in a modest rented apartment across from Baker's Park. He had plenty of dough and could have owned a house somewhere, but his dad taught him property is for buying and selling, not loafing upon. He liked his simple life, save for Mrs. Goldberg downstairs. She often looked at him askance in the hallway and seemed to be against everything he stood for. In the past, it had only been a mild annoyance since they both worked every day and communicated rarely. The problem now was Mrs. Goldberg, a moth-infested crone who kept her hair up like a silver knitting ball, had decided to retire from her mindless librarian job at the exact same time that Davenport left his investment business. So lo and behold, Baker's Park was going to be her new home too. Every day she brought a plastic garbage bag filled with bread slices that she picked up in an alley behind an Italian restaurant in town. At the end of the night, the proprietor made sure to leave her a healthy stash beside the dumpster, and she would swing by at 8 in the morning to collect it on her way to the park to feed the pigeons. Everybody loved Mrs. Goldberg, but everybody didn't have to live above her in an apartment building or now be forced to sit across from her in the park. To Davenport, the woman was a sad sack witch who promoted filth and pestilence in public places. So on this early April morning, Davenport decided it was time to take some action and end the Goldberg charade for good. Davenport's former job was in and around the stock market, which had given him ample opportunity to learn how to deal with enemies. There were many angles of attack, but for the weak and feeble, such as Mrs. Goldberg, the best method was to destroy the opponent's support structure and leave them alone and exposed, naked and sick. Unfortunately, he couldn't very well go around town spreading nasty rumors about the old bag. Actually, he could, but it would be risky. She was a sweet little old lady with a spotless reputation, and Davenport was an aggressive broker with well, let's just say there are a lot of ugly stereotypes about his kind of people. No, his character attrition would have to be subtler. Plus, he had his own reputation to build among the high school students to whom he would dispense father's precious lessons once Mrs. Goldberg was disposed of. He watched her from the square while sitting on a worn wooden bench. She sat on the other side of a concrete fountain where a fat little angel spit up dirty reclaimed water into a big round basin. Davenport sat motionless as he stared down the Goldberg lady, who busily tore apart bread slices and tossed them at eager little rat birds. They gurgled before her in an ugly, ecstatic choir and walked in stupid circles like a moron looking for his car keys in the grass. Davenport finally stood up, walked around the fountain and across the square and stood before the old woman. The pigeons scattered timidly and stubbornly as he approached. Mrs. Goldberg was mildly irritated by the commotion, but put on a good neighbor smile. She looked up at him with eyes of wisdom, the wisdom one gains from sitting in a building full of books for 45 years. Why, hello there, Mr. Davenport. So nice to see you in the park on this beautiful, beautiful spring day. Davenport looked around and only saw sickness. It's not spring. The trees are still dead. Not much beauty in a park full of dead trees and dirty pigeons. My, somebody woke up on a lumpy couch this morning, didn't they? I slept fine. The only lumpy thing I see is a park stuffed with grimy little winged rodents. Now, you stop that, Mr. Davenport. These little friends have never done anything to harm you. They have as much right to God's earth as you do. This isn't God's earth, it's a people's park. And they don't belong to God's earth anyway. They're little mutants that would die in a second. Batty old bras like you would just let nature run its course. Stop at this instant, Mr. Davenport. My father used to say, nature that can't fend for itself is Darwin's greatest bane. These pigeons are proof of the death of God. What's gotten into you? Why aren't you working, plundering the poor? Are you drunk, Mr. Davenport? No, Mrs. Goldberg, I'm not drunk. I'm here as an officer of humanity to ask you to obey the local ordinances and stop feeding these sick animals. This is against the law. Mrs. Goldberg turned livid and slammed a newspaper that she had been holding onto the bench next to her. There is no law. There are no signs posted. If you don't cease and desist in this abuse, I'll show you the real law. A couple walking their dog were approaching just into earshot, and Mrs. Goldberg looked over at them and back at Davenport, almost daring him to continue his rant. There is a way out of this, Mrs. Goldberg. I don't want a way out of this. I want to be left alone to feed these poor birds. Not for you, I mean for me. What, leave? Go back to your barbaric high-rise downtown? Go and manipulate the markets while millions of Americans watch their dreams melt into burning, rusted trash cans while they warm their hands during the cold, ruthless nights? Pigeons scattered as the couple approached with their dog. The couple glanced at Mrs. Goldberg and then at Davenport. They seemed ready to jump in and assist her when suddenly their Great Dane jerked forward as it chased a lone pigeon that hadn't scattered fast enough. Davenport watched as the dog was about to pounce on the frightened bird, but the pigeon quickly took flight, barely escaping the dog's paw and landing on a tree branch safely above the park. He looked at Mrs. Goldberg and smiled. Evidence was on display even as they spoke. Pigeons were doomed in a world without Mrs. Goldberg's. You can spew your literary spin all you want, Davenport said. I'll tell you how I plan to solve this. Have you ever seen what Alka-Seltzer does to a bird? What? Alka-Seltzer, my dear Goldberg, Mrs. Goldberg, gets inside a pigeon's gut and causes all the food to expand like a balloon full of helium until the bird explodes into a confetti blast of feathers and intestines. It's really a grotesque sight if you want to know the truth. Are you threatening to blow up the pigeons? I'll call the SPCA immediately. They have jails for sick people like you. She looked over at the couple on the plea for support, but they were too busy wrestling their agitated dog to pay any attention. No, I'm not the one who'll blow up the pigeons, Davenport said. You will. What kind of sick, twisted lack of logic are you trying to lay on me, you brute? I'm going to poison all your bread. I'm going to spike it with Alka-Seltzer. You're mad. Only just mad enough to deal with you. I don't believe you. That would take hours of your time and cost a fortune in Alka-Seltzer. I may not have a lot in my life, Mrs. Goldberg, but I do have time and I do have money. Mrs. Goldberg stood up from the bench and tied up the plastic bag filled with bread slices. She looked down at the flock of pigeons, many of which had found their way back to her. Come, my little love children, let's get away from this man. He's a lunatic, I tell you. She looked at Davenport straight in the eyes, pointing her finger. You'll never get away with this. As God is my witness, you'll spend the rest of your days in the booby hatch. You'll see, he shouted as she walked away. Those fat infestations will literally be farting their guts out. This whole square will be a sea of blood and pigeon intestines. He felt a demonic possession overtake him and started to laugh as Mrs. Goldberg moved quickly to a bench at the far corner of the square with her birds in full tow. She glanced back at him in darted anger and then down at her precious flock. Davenport turned to walk back to his bench when he beheld a high school couple walking directly toward him. They were young and beautiful and full of life. He felt like a magnet pulling youth toward his wisdom. Hey kids, he called out as he approached. They began to veer to the left to get past him. Hey kids, let's sit down on the bench. I've got something to tell you. The girl pulled her arm tightly around her boyfriend's waist as he snarled, Not interested. No, you don't understand. I want to tell you about love. Not interested, the boy repeated as they walked past Davenport toward the other end of the park, presumably to the Burger King across the street. Listen, he called out as they walked away. You're new to this love thing. My father told me the first bright fire of youth is a blinding one. You need to understand this. It's like a parable. They scurried away quickly. The girl gave a furtive glance back as she held the boy tightly. That was all right. There were plenty more like them. His father once told him, Many see the trough on the horizon, but only the mighty attend the feeding. Or was it the drinking? He couldn't remember and wished he had taken notes, but he hated his father back then, and it was enough that he was able to remember the words of wisdom. He turned behind him to see Mrs. Goldberg attending to the growing flock of birds at her bench. She looked serene in a sickening sort of way, and it made him loathe her more. If only he had known Mrs. Goldberg in his youth, he would have hated her and could then have had room to love his father. It was clear by her calm demeanor that she didn't really believe that he had it in him to poison pigeons. Davenport's plan had simply been to try to scare her into seeking police protection for the birds, and then perhaps she tried to convince the store owner to hire a watchman to guard the day-old bread through the night. She was just the kind of stupid broad who would insist on something like that and immediately transform herself from a sweet old lady to a needy old hag that people would run away from. But now Davenport felt he had been dared. No man is a man who turns down a dare, no matter how stupid he be. His father taught him how utterly true this was as he stood now at the precipice of his retirement years. And I will stop there. And the next phase of the story, he goes to Rite Aid to buy Alka-Seltzer. So
that was great.
And yeah, and I guess, so we'll do what, you had some questions for me, and then maybe I'll read a little excerpt from my novel.
Yeah, you bet. Oh, we'll take some audience questions in just a minute. If you don't mind sharing, or do you have a question about that particular story that you wanted to ask right now? Okay.
Charlie, did he end up buying the Alka-Seltzer and putting it in the bread?
Well, that's that's a teaser I gave you. So yeah.
So you can't tell me.
Yeah,
That's awful.
I would. Yeah, I'll tell you in private if you want.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Charlie, what's the inspiration behind that short story?
You know, that's interesting. I wrote that as a free write. I actually did, and it just kind of came out of me. You know, that's a good question though. Thanks, Bob. It just, yeah. It just, I don't know. I was at a point where I was writing about a lot of damaged people, and Davenport kind of came up and just took over that story.
All right, well, I do have some questions for you. Let's see, first one, we're down here. So your fiction tends to focus on people who might be called damaged, as you were just talking about. Those who have led eccentric lives and lived beyond the lines of what society deems respectable, like pigeon poisoners. What interests you about these characters, and why do you think they make for compelling reading?
You know, because I just think they tell a good story. You know, I really do. Not all the stories are, you know, kind of quirky and dark like that one, but it is, I would say, almost entirely, it is, you know, kind of oddball characters. You know, a couple of them are, you know, wayward youth. Those I think are semi-autobiographical. I mean, they're fictional characters, but they draw from my own experience. But yeah, I just think it makes for a good story. I see them as sort of being an exaggeration of society, so they become kind of a satire, you know, a place for satire.
All right, that makes sense. Yeah. Another question for you. So I've read that you struggled with addiction for many years. How did your experience in recovery help you to become a writer? And are there any similarities between you and your characters' experiences?
Well, yeah, I'd say I was probably, and maybe some would argue still, I'm sort of a damaged, tortured character. I'd like to think that, well, you know, I guess we all have this where, you know, whatever is happening in our life, we tend to kind of transpose it on the world. But I sort of see addiction as being, you know, a factor in a lot of aspects of society, you know, beyond the, you know, obvious exaggerated examples of, you know, drugs and alcohol, etc. And so in that sense, that life, you know, my own personal life and the work that I've done in trying to, you know, just understand my life better has, I think, given me, a certain type of insight into characteristics, into people. And I like to think that also the addict's life, it's kind of like, when Freud was in Vienna at the, the turn of the 20th century, he was dealing with very exaggerated cases of people, with sexual dysfunctions and, inner, subliminal issues, whatever. And with those exaggerated cases, he was able to develop a lot of theories of, in psychology. And in a literary way, I think that addiction kind of helps me with that, in the way that I paint characters. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
I like the analogy. Yeah. Cool. Michael Steiner over here has his little blue hand raised. What you got?
Hey, Charlie.
Yeah.
Hey, tell us a little about truth management.
Truth management. Yeah. That was something that I used to practice back in my younger days. When I was trying to elicit sympathy and I didn't want to actually tell people what was really going on. I think it's something that, I heard this, CIA does that, where they offer little kernels of truth as close, lies as close to the truth as possible. So anyway, that's my truth management program.
Yeah.
Did you want to read something more for us?
Yeah, well, I was thinking I would read a excerpt from, I have a novel right now that, I'm looking for a publisher. It's my third novel. It's called A Long Time Gone, and it's about it's a coming of age story about a college grad who hitchhikes up to the Yukon. It's actually semi-autobiographical, in terms of the trip, but, it's not, the character is not me. Well, I guess it could be to some extent. I don't know, whatever. A Long Time Gone, part one. And it starts off with a quote from a Bob Dylan song that he never recorded called Long Time Gone. So you can have your beauty, it's skin deep and it only lies. And you can have your youth, it'll rot before your eyes. Just give to me my gravestone with it clearly carved upon. It's a long time coming and I'll be a long time gone. Chapter 1. The book was like an oracle calling out from deep within some gold mine, a voice as old as India and as pure as a Native American vision quest. Written by a wildland firefighter, it is what brought me into the backseat of an old beat-up white Datsun 510. I was crunched behind a backwoods stoner couple, and we were headed up the US 101 freeway ramp from Oak Street in San Francisco as I began my journey north to the last frontier. By 1982, holding your thumb out on a US highway was no longer the same freewheeling cross-country jaunt that it was in the 40s and 50s, the days of Jack Kerouac, Woody Guthrie, or the great sage and car thief Neil Cassidy. First off, there were no US highways anymore, at least in the way I remembered them. The whole country was a never-ending ribbon of on-ramps and off-ramps, where the most remote deserts and farmlands stood waiting to dissolve into an industrial wasteland. A concrete jungle that fused Upton Sinclair and Bob Marley into a desperate disco song blasting out from tract-home suburban shopping malls. The Datsun couple who picked me up on my way out of San Francisco that day were the real live hillbillies. Like their clothing, their English was disheveled and twangy, and their worldview didn't seem to extend much beyond the windows of their little car. But I respected them anyway. Unlike the educated multitude of Reaganites across the country who are racing toward a MasterCard future, they maintained the free-spirited vagabond existence I had read about in college. They also radiated a desperation that told me they were at least subliminally aware that the era of peace and love was about to be bulldozed by a new Bee Gees, ABBA, Weltanschauung, then buried under a skyscraper next to Jimmy Hoffa's corpse in a tomb of unknown soldiers. The Datsun couple clearly wanted no part of that world. Their life, I later gathered, was an endless series of weed deals that just barely kept their tank full of gas and their belly full of Oreo cookies. I had already gleaned from observing other drifters, such as deadheads, that marijuana was the currency of the new underground class. It seemed an odd currency since it was so combustible, but I guess in a sense so was the US dollar. And at least the marijuana smoke deadened the pain of dystopia and couldn't be collected in some oligarch's bank account to be hoarded from those who would actually use it. And the seeds could always be planted, making marijuana a forever renewable currency. Despite my cynicism, it's important to be clear that I wasn't some radical leftist hoping for Reagan's American dream to crash and burn. In fact, I was a far cry from that. In 1982, I was a recent Ivy League grad who would soon be on my way back to Washington, D.C. to go to work for my father's lobbying firm representing mining interests in the Southwest United States. It's just that at that moment in my life, my intestines were filled with dread and skepticism about this ready-made future. And I was trying to delay my inevitable doom by taking this final journey off to discover the last great frontier land of the Klondike and perhaps find a guiding light. I was squeezed next to my backpack and guitar case in the tiny back of the Datsun as we idled and jerked our way through the morning rush hour traffic toward Interstate 80 and the Oakland Bay Bridge. The young hillbilly girl in the passenger seat up front seemed absolutely delighted to have me in the car, as if I were a new puppy she'd found by the side of the road. She was one of the most anomalous looking chicks I'd ever seen in my life. Each individual feature on her face was cute, but the combination somehow didn't quite add up to cuteness. Instead, it made her look deformed. "So where are you going?" she asked. "I'm hitchhiking to the Yukon." "Wow, wowie, wow." She looked as if she wanted to climb over the seat and hug the shit out of me. She started bobbing her head up and down. "Hey, racehorse, did you hear that? He's hitchhiking up to the Yukon." "Yeah, Sugar, I heard that." Sugar looked at me and giggled. She pointed at her boyfriend, or whatever he was. "I call him Racehorse. Do you know why I call him Racehorse?" "No, I sure don't." "Because he's my racehorse." She laughed like a crazy girl. "That's funny, Sugar," Racehorse said. It went on like this for nearly an hour in the slow traffic, a constant barrage of meaningless non sequiturs and personal anecdotes about their lives until we got to the MacArthur Boulevard exit off Interstate 580 in Oakland. They were going to see a friend and sample some weed. They invited me to join them, but I could read disaster in every toke. There were times when it was appropriate to share a joint with companions, much like a peace pipe, and other times when it was ill-advised. My personal history with weed told me to pass on this occasion and continue my momentum out of the Bay Area before my mind was clogged by hallucinations of the horrors that awaited me once I returned to DC, learning to make my backroom lobbying deals with demon-infested congressmen like Frank Murkowski and Orrin Hatch. As Sugar and the Datsun sped away, or puttered at least, I thought about my newly ex-sweetheart Lola and all the things she wasn't, such as an ignorant backwater hillbilly girl. It's funny how after you leave a woman, you see all the things you've now lost and can't seem to remember what it was you had envisioned gaining by letting her go. And actually, I was probably deluding myself anyway. First off, Lola and I were not a true couple, and the reason we were no longer together had everything to do with the same coming doom that was leading me out on the road. Lola would never leave her adventurous bohemian world of arts and literature to follow me to the steps of the US Capitol, where I would be spending 10+ hours a day serving that Wall Street purgatory of Walking Dead and then retreating to the safety of a Georgetown home. No, I would have to walk the gangplank to the faceless world of high finance and industry by myself.
Fun. That's a good beginning. How far into that are you?
That's done. That is waiting. Yeah, that's a completed book, fully revised and edited.
I'm just going to cut in here and tell you I think it's a great book. I'm sorry. Yeah, because I've already seen an early draft, but I just think this is a wonderful recount of a particular situation that is really germane to today's political situation. So enough said.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
So what stage is the book in then? If it's finished?
It is post-production, looking for a publisher.
Oh,
Well, I
cool.
guess not post-production if it's looking for a publisher, but pre-post-production looking for a publisher.
There you go. Yeah.
Charlie, I was
Yes.
going to say the same thing. This is Oriana. I really liked it. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm
Yeah,
glad.
I can't wait.
Charlie, hi, Michael here. Hey, I'm so glad that you did the short stories. The book was phenomenal. I loved so many of them.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, terrific.
Charlie, this is Amelia.
Oh, hi, Amelia.
Hi.
Yeah.
I love the intro to the new book, and I can't wait for it to come out. Did you say what the title is going to be?
Oh, it's the one I just read the excerpt from is A Long Time Gone.
Oh, yes. Okay. Can't wait.
All right. Well, thank you.
William, you've been so patient with your.
Oh, Charlie, it's Bill.
Bill?
I love it. You must have read the minds of all of us, of those of us fellow addicts, when you have a character like Davenport unleash all the adjectives that I can't find when I'm frustrated at the DMV or any small. It's really good writing, and that taste of your new book, we're all waiting for more. I kind of, is that your method? It's like unleashing that, finding that thing and finding a character and going, okay, I'm just going to let go on this one and look for descriptive to have fun with, and then have this balance of the Mrs. Goldberg on the bench with her pigeons.
Well, I studied improv acting, and I learned a lot about writing from doing improv. One of the secrets that I was given early on was, there's a tendency to block good ideas or be afraid because something sounds stupid. And one of the things we learned in improv is there's no such thing as a bad first offer. Whatever comes out of your mouth, it may seem like the dumbest thing in the world. It's what you add to it. That's the whole principle of yes-anding. Yes, accepting the offer and then adding to it. And then the other principle in improv in terms of storytelling is going into the cave. And the last thing we want to do if we're walking by a cave and we hear growling inside, you want to move on. In good storytelling, you turn, you walk in. I wonder what's in here, and see. And so that's what I try to do with my stories. I just try to amp up the situation as best I mean, not always like in a weird way, like in that particular story. Some of it's, I think very sweet. There are a couple of stories there that I really, are very close to my heart, that are very sweet stories. And there's very little, kind of quirky humor. I mean, there is some quirky humor, but not a lot. But even then, I try to go into really intense, difficult places and see how the characters ferret it out. And I actually find out a lot about myself. I'm more scared of stuff than, I remember I heard Hitchcock say that, that he hated scary movies and reading scary books. And I kind of identify with that now. I just I suspense. I think Barbie's on here. Like there's certain things that I need somebody to be with me to watch them. Otherwise, I'm just going to change channels and jump to something else because I don't like tension, which I think is kind of pathetic, but it's one of those things.
Thank you, Charlie.
Do we have other questions from folks? You can type them in, you can raise your hand, yeah, there you go.
Right, yeah. Hey, Charlie, Bob again.
Bob.
Hey, as you kind of look at your writings, who do you think are your greatest kind of the examples that you try to follow, or where, from what authors do you say, wow, that guy is really talented. I really captures the moment, captures the emotion. From where do you draw your, I asked a question earlier about inspiration. This is more now towards the authors that you enjoy.
I say for short fiction, there's a writer died, I think in the 1990s, named Raymond Carver. And I loved him, and I just I really, it took me a while. I mean, the first few times I read his stories, it was as if there was nothing there at all. And I was like, what is this? But then something happened where I kind of got pulled in, and then I was like, oh my God, his stories are deceptively simple. There's like a sea of stuff going on, and I just really got into that. I like Kurt Vonnegut's short stories a lot. Welcome. He's only written a couple of volumes, but both of them. Welcome to the Monkey House I liked a lot, and a couple of, some of the stories from the second book, which I think was actually, published after his death. There's a guy named Tim O'Brien. It's written, he wrote The Things They Carried, and
Oh
it's
yeah, sure.
Vietnam. Yeah,
Yeah.
and Going After Cacciato, I love him. Another writer who I'm really big on, Dennis Johnson. And he wrote, they made a movie of one of his books called Jesus' Son, but he wrote a whole series of novels and also poetry that I love. So those are some examples. I could go on.
Sure, yeah, yeah. And when you're, when you sit down and you conceive a story, is there a process that you go through? Is it something like you're walking down the street or sitting on the beach in Hawaii and saying, oh, you know what? I'd really like to take a character down this path? Or how is it? What's the one spark that comes to mind in terms of, okay, I've got something to start and we'll see where it leads?
It's funny you ask that because this novel that I'm writing right now, I just started. It was in my head for a long time. I started, stopped, started. That one I have like a really kind of a long distance idea of. And I guess both the one I just was reading from A Long Time Gone and my second novel, A Shot of Malaria, since they both have some autobiographical, stuff. And I had a general sense. With A Long Time Gone, I didn't even know what that story was about until I wrote like a screenplay treatment for it, and the teacher corrected something, and he just yelled. He didn't verbally yell. On paper yelled, capital letters. No, you got this wrong. It was my story. I was actually a little taken aback. You've got this wrong. But then I looked at it and I thought about it, and it's just this big light bulb went off, and I realized, oh my God, that's what this novel's about. So yeah, so that one I was drawn from my own experience, and then sort of finding a theme. My first novel, WINIFRED, and most of my short stories come from free writes. I just start writing, and then at a certain point, I've heard it described as the headlight style of writing. I know what's happening as far as the headlights show. And then at a certain point, the destination kind of comes into my head, and I realize now, okay, so this is where I'm going. And then I work my way over there. Sometimes that can be bad though, because I'll rush to try to finish it once I know where it's going, and that can be a mistake.
Yeah, I really enjoyed A Shot of Malaria. That was a great book. I have to confess I've not read the other ones, but I will certainly go pick them up, and the new one when it's available. But are you as a writer, do you kind of say, okay, I have to write for 2 hours every day? Do you kind of get into a zone? Is it a discipline thing, or is it more of I'm feeling it, I'm in the zone, let's go?
Well, the discipline part of it is that I do sit down every day to write. I absolutely just sit down, lock myself in. Whether I write or not, that's a different story. I've spent long periods of time. I used to write in a coffee house in San Rafael, the Aroma Cafe, and I would just sit there for like an hour staring at the screen. But there's something funny about that I got to tell you, and that is that I will write sometimes in those situations, and that was Shot of Malaria, it was a lot like that, and A Long Time Gone. I might write a couple of sentences, and then the next day I'm staring at the screen, same thing, and I write a couple of sentences. All of a sudden, I'll go back and I'll be reading over, and there'll be paragraphs that I had put in, like just a few sentences at a time, that were just almost throwaway things I just didn't want to leave without writing, that I go, oh my God, that's brilliant. So which tells me that I really don't know. I can't take a lot of credit for writing. This sounds hokey, but I really believe there's a kind of a muse aspect to it. There's something, if I try to keep myself open and writing, then I can be more of a conduit than in other words, I don't think I'm a genius by any stretch. I just try to stay open and put out, well, not that my works are genius anyway. It should let me back that up like 10 yards, 20 yards. Were they genius works, it wouldn't be me. It would be what comes from me.
Yeah, well, you're clearly talented, and you have a command of the English language, and you allow your readers to be in the room with you as they're experiencing the characters. So that is, whether that's genius or not, it certainly is a lot of talent.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, Charlie, it's Jim. Now, I'm fascinated by, first of all, I loved the book, although I have to say I only wrote 3 of the stories, but I've read the others. I'm interested in that stream of consciousness issue because I detected that, only not in the books, but in when you and I would discuss about you heading to the Yukon or whatever we might do, over the last couple of years. And how do you counter that and get disciplined about, because you got so disciplined. I can remember well, you haven't published it yet, but I can remember specific scenes in the draft I saw. And, how do you do that? I just think it's fascinating because I can't do it. I just get caught in the stream of consciousness and then, I don't get things culled down to something that's presentable.
It sounds cliche, but I trust the process. I really do. I just start writing. I mean, that's one of the things I was told the best way to overcome writer's block is to write. There was that book, The Artist's Way. I can't remember her name.
Julia Cameron's
wife, yeah. Anyway, and she had this thing where you do morning pages where you just write. Actually, WINIFRED, my first novel, came out of that. I just wrote. I didn't care. Like if I couldn't think of anything to write, I wrote. I can't think of anything to write, and continued to write. I can't think of anything to write until just stuff exploded out, and it just, that really helped. We do that in improv too. It's another thing, let what there's no such thing as a bad first offer. So you just let whatever come out, and then work on it. A lot of people say if the first draft is going to be bad, so let it be, let it be bad. Don't worry about it. Just get it out. And then I can hone it, and I look at it as like being a block of whatever marble, and then, you chisel away and find whatever the work is inside of it.
Cool. We have a question from Paige that she typed in here. A 2-part question. When did you know that you were a writer? And how much would you charge per hour to read to me?
Okay. First, I'm going to back up on this one. And Paige doesn't know this, but she is right here on page 3 of my book. A very special thanks to Marianne Mayer for editing and proofreading this material, Lillian Tanous, Benjamin Grant Bossy, Richard Olive, Lynn Celeste Gonzalez, and Paige Jenkins for walking with me as I developed these stories. So anyway, thank you, Paige. And as far as knowing that I was a writer, I don't know. I got it when I was 13 years old. I had a teacher tell me I should write, and I carried that with me. I went home to my mom and told her, my teacher says I'm a writer, and then I had another high school teacher, poor woman. I used to write poetry while I would smoke angel dust, drop Valium, drink wine, and just write these like suicide letters, essentially, and submit them to her as poetry. And I think I kind of frazzled her mind, but she did encourage me. And then I started a novel about a folk singer who goes down to Nashville to try to make it. And I realized I didn't know anything about guitar, so I learned how to play guitar, and I just became the character in the novel. Forgot about writing for 20 years, played guitar and banjo, blah, blah, blah. And then it's encouragement, actually, that helped. I took a class at College Marin from a guy named James Tipton, and he encouraged me in writing, and I enjoyed doing it. I didn't think it was any good, but that group that I was in with you and Richard and Lily, I think that was when it started to really come to me. Yes, I feel like I'm a writer, and so hopefully that answers your question right there. Yeah, you were kind of part of that process. And as far as reading, I read for free to people as long as they like it. So if you like what I'm reading, I will read to you for free.
Good answer. Do we have more questions? If you want to raise their hand or type something in. Oh, wait, here we go. from Bob. Charlie, I recently heard that some authors have had their plots aided by their characters themselves. Have you had a similar experience?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I let the characters I mean, I have ideas, but I let the characters run free. You know, I mean, they will tell me what's going on. You know, I try to be a slave to the story, and characters do not obey. In fact, some of the stuff, and it's true with poetry too. I've often sat down with poems with like some, you know, thesis in mind, and the poem just went completely off the rails, and in truth was, you know, certainly a better poem than the one I thought I was going to write. So yeah, I let the characters, I let the story, let all that dictate itself. I mean, I may have guidelines for what I want, but if they aren't going to, if the story isn't going to cooperate with it, the story wins.
All right. Anyone else? Looks like not. I'm gonna throw in here one more time the link for Annie Blooms to pick up his collection. And remember that Charles will sign those, and not the actual book itself, but sign a book plate and send them to the store if that is your request, or you can just buy the book itself. Yeah, one last call for questions. Any other questions? Okay, well,
I wanted to just say that it really gave me pause about the work, how you work, because I have this painting going that is just so difficult. I bit off more than I could chew. And now I realize, okay, just take a little time, couple hours a day, go work on it, then go do whatever else you have to do, then go back to it. So thank you for that, Charlie.
All right, thanks. Hey, I just want to again thank you all for coming. I mean, I'm blown away. I mean, it really is great. It's great to see you and had a chance to read to you. So.
all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Charles. This is a great evening, great event. Thanks for everyone for showing up. Hope to see you at some future events. And we're recording this event. It's going to be up on our YouTube channel probably sometime tomorrow afternoon, evening, if you want to watch it again or tell your friends. Yeah, again, thanks so much. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Charlie. Bye.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Charlie.
Charlie.
Good luck.
Charlie.
Bye.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks.